The 2017 movie It and its 2019 sequel gave us enough jump scares to last a lifetime, but if you think you've seen everything, think again. Both films left behind a long, very long trail of deleted scenes that were either cut for pacing or deemed too disturbing for the final cut. I mean, one of them had the monster gorging on an infant, while another had one girl doing all the guys from the losers group. Yeah, that's right, director Andy Muschietti has even teased the idea of a supercut to bring some of those lost scenes back to the light. But until that happens, you and I can contend with the deleted scenes, and in this video, we're going to explore all 21 of them. We may have left out a few extremely minor ones, but if you think we missed out on something major on this list, you're welcome to let us know in the comments down below. So, my dear residents of Derry, be sure to grab your red balloons because we all float here, and we're jumping right into it. Stan Uris's Bar Mitzvah blow-up and the lead-up. Stanley Uris had a couple of key character scenes trimmed from the final film, both centered around his bar mitzvah. In one excised moment, we see Stan practicing his Torah reading at the synagogue while his father, who also happens to be the town rabbi, was there with him, lending an ear to his recital. Stan's dad corrects his Hebrew pronunciation mid-recital, which is otherwise a small thing, but it becomes a telling glimpse of the pressure Stan is under to be the perfect rabbi's perfect son. This was also the setup for what would have been Stan's big speech after the ceremony. Alas, even that was left on the cutting room floor. The bar mitzvah speech itself was fully filmed, but ultimately cut. In this deleted scene, mild-mannered Stan reaches a breaking point in front of the people gathered there. Instead of a safe, pre-written speech, he pretty much scolds and reprimands the town of Derry itself and its citizens for their complacency, especially the ones who should be doing something about the whole situation. Stan calls out the adults for their indifference to the suffering and disappearances around them. Here, he was basically accusing the town's elders of ignoring Derry's evil. If you think about it, the scene is a pretty empowering outburst from the shy loser club member, so much so that Richie gives him a standing ovation as Stan storms off the podium. The moment was later repurposed in It Chapter 2, and the sequel shows an older Richie reminiscing about young Stan's gutsy speech during a flashback to that day. In the context of Chapter 1, however, the filmmakers felt Stan's winning stand would sort of lack a worthy payoff without a follow-up. The scene only truly works if we get to see Stan's courage change something within him, which, in the final film, we don't. As director Andy Muschietti noted, the speech's message of condemning apathy only makes sense and pays off if the audience later sees Stan overcome his fears. Since Stan's arc takes a tragic turn as an adult, the decision was made to omit the scene in Chapter 1. Bill's family at dinner. Not every deleted scene was scary or about someone lashing out. Some were more, mellow, such as the one that deals with Bill Denbrough's family grief. A dinner table scene was cut that shows Bill, his parents, and the empty chair that used to belong to little Georgie. In the scene, Bill tries to bring up the annual family vacation and also suggests plans for that year's vacation. This immediately strikes a nerve as his mom goes silent and leaves the table visibly upset. Bill's dad explains that Georgie had been really looking forward to that trip, which shows how the youngest member's death had cast a dark shadow of gloom over the household. That's kind of a downer, so let's pause for a few seconds. If you've enjoyed this video thus far, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's continue. The flooded basement. Another missing moment follows one of Bill's scariest encounters. After Pennywise terrorizes Bill in the flooded basement, Bill sprints upstairs and literally runs into his father. In the deleted aftermath, his dad investigates the basement to prove nothing's there, and indeed, he finds no supernatural flood, just a dry, ordinary cellar. He sternly tells his shaken son to get to bed. This bit confirms that Bill's parents remain oblivious to Derry's horrors and their son's trauma, and it wouldn't be wrong to say that their actions were willful. Notably, that same night, Henry Bowers is shown sneaking out past his drunken father, but more on Henry's stuff in a moment. The family vacation did actually happen, almost. It Chapter 1 almost ended on a slightly more hopeful, albeit still eerie note for the Denbroughs. In an alternate closing scene, after the losers defeat Pennywise in the sewers, Bill's parents finally decide it's time for a change of scenery. The deleted epilogue shows Bill and his folks packing up the family car for a much-needed vacation away from Derry. It's a quiet, touching moment of the family trying to move forward from Georgie's death. Bill even says a gentle goodbye to Beverly before he leaves and wraps up their summer friendship. But as the car pulls out of the driveway, driveway, the camera pans down to the storm drain on their street, the very sewer where Georgie was taken. Rain begins to fall, and we're left staring at that curbside where Pennywise usually lurks. The implication is that Bill's family may be moving on, but it isn't gone for good. Director Muschietti originally thought that this would be the perfect final shot to tease Chapter 2. Ultimately, the theatrical cut opted to end with the loser's blood oath, which left Pennywise's survival a little bit more ambiguous, at least until his laugh in the credits. However, we think this Denbro family vacation ending, equal parts heartwarming and foreboding, would have driven home that sense of temporary relief before the next storm. Patrick Hockstetter's full death scene. Henry Bowers and his goons caused plenty of trouble in the movie, but their darkest deeds were mostly left off-screen. One casualty of the cutting room was Patrick Hockstetter's full death scene. In the finished film, Patrick, the fire-obsessed bully, wanders into the sewers alone and meets Pennywise. We see the children from all the missing posters corner him, and then Pennywise lunges at him. Originally, this sequence was even more graphic. Reports from early screenings and leaked props show that Patrick was actually shown being attacked and mauled to death. In fact, a pretty gory and visceral prop of Patrick's rotting corpse was created for the film, in which the corpse was wearing the same cat t-shirt the character had on in the film. The Losers Club was supposed to stumble across Patrick's body in the sewers later on, which would have told them just how real and deadly Pennywise was, but the scene was cut because of pacing issues and the gratuitous gore. The fate of Henry's friends. As for Henry Bowers, It 2017 already shows him murdering his abusive father, but it turns out Henry didn't stop there. A deleted scene confirms that Henry also slaughters his own friends, Belch and Victor, of course under Pennywise's influence. In this moment, which was included on the Blu-ray, Henry sits in his Camaro watching the losers head into the Neibolt house for the final battle, and he had this crazed look and blood all over his face. The camera reveals Belch and Vic slumped in the car with their throats slit. Henry is literally shaking as he grips the wheel, having just butchered his buddies and crossed that final line into madness. This explains why, when Henry attacks the losers at the well house later, he's caked in blood and operating alone now. It's a reference to the novel's version of events where Henry's friends never make it out of the haunted house alive. The film ultimately cuts this for brevity and only hints at it indirectly, so if you ever wondered why Henry is suddenly alone and blood-soaked in the third act, now you know. The extra carnage shows just how completely Pennywise broke Henry's mind by the end of that summer and set him up to be a deranged pawn 27 years later. The infamous baby-eating flashback. Perhaps the most talked about deleted scene is one we've never gotten to see. It's a 1600s flashback so disturbing that it's still locked away in the Warner Bros. Vault. Actor Bill Skarsgård, who plays Pennywise, revealed that they filmed a sequence taking place around 1637 in Derry's colonial days, showing a form of it before it adopted the clown persona. Skarsgård wasn't in full Pennywise makeup for this scene. He appeared more human as the demonic entity in an earlier guise. According to Skarsgård, the flashback was intended to be a brief origin story, but it was really disturbing and the studio felt it went too far. So what actually happens in this infamous scene? Thanks to a leaked script excerpt, we know it involves a woman named Abigail and her infant child in Derry's early settlement days. Pennywise, or rather it in a pre-clown form, slithers out of a well in Abigail's cabin, where he appears as a pale, shape-shifting monstrosity. Furthermore, he was naked, lithe, flesh-pale, and translucent, with a maw of razor-sharp teeth. In the scene, Pennywise speaks in a guttural, inhuman voice and mockingly calls himself the Eater of Worlds when Abigail prays to him as the devil. He coerces the terrified mother with a simple but horrific ultimatum. She could either give up her baby or have her entire family and everyone she loves slaughtered. Poor Abigail tearfully kisses her infant and sets him down, effectively sacrificing her child in the desperate hope of saving her older son and herself. Pennywise disappears into the darkness, then crawls back out behind the mother and pounces on the crying baby. We hear a sickening crunch and suddenly the baby stops crying. Needless to say, the crunching sound was Pennywise's teeth chomping down on baby's bones. Abigail, in shock, can only stare into the creature's supernatural deadlights as her child is eaten alive just a few feet away. Yeah, there's no gentle way to put it. It went full-on cannibal baby in this scene. Actually, it's probably wrong to call it cannibalism because it isn't a human, but either way, it's easy to see why the studio didn't want to go ahead with this particular scene. The sequence was deemed too upsetting for audiences, so it never made it to the final cut or any home release. Director Muschietti later confirmed the scene does exist in full and that he hopes it might surface someday in a director's edition, but we're not so sure if we want to watch it. Are you? Let us know your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. Georgie lives? The joke alternate opening. Not all deletions were doom and gloom. In fact, the filmmakers even had a bit of cheeky fun with its opening. The Blu-ray has this opening gag scene that shows the Georgie Pennywise storm drain encounter with an alternate happy ending. In this take, little Georgie actually gets his paper boat back safely. We see Pennywise's eyes light up as Georgie reaches for the boat, but instead of chowing down on an arm, Pennywise fumbles. Georgie snatches the SS Georgie and cheerily bids adieu, saying see you later, and then he simply skips off into the rain with 2 arms intact. An annoyed Pennywise is left empty-handed in the sewers. This tongue-in-cheek scene was never meant for the actual film, of course. It was more of a cute Easter egg the crew shot for laughs. It essentially lets poor Georgie and the audience imagine an alternate universe where the kid lives happily ever after, and that malevolent clown's reflexes just weren't quick enough. The tone here is humorous, the editing was very intentionally kept goofy, and yet the absurdity of Pennywise being outsmarted by a 6-year-old was too good to be true. Including this on the home release as a deleted scene was a brilliant bit of humor, albeit dark humor. It gives squeamish fans a definitive version to pretend everything ends well, in the sense that Georgie is safe, the losers have what you can call a swell summer, and poor old Pennywise, armless, sulks in defeat. Stan's hesitation outside Neibolt house. During the loser's first visit to the Neibolt street house, not everyone was gung-ho about going inside. A slashed bit shows Stan Uris frozen with fear on the lawn, so much so that he was unable to bring himself through the door, while Bill, Richie, and Eddie went in. Mike, however, stays back to comfort Stan, and Ben puts his hand on Beverly's shoulder as they wait outside, quite anxiously of course. It's a nice little character moment for Stan as his phobia manifests, and the others notice it. It clearly shows that not all the losers were ready to battle a demon clown at the drop of a hat, and it makes the losers more realistic and relatable. Having said that, in the finished film, Stan's terror is still pretty much out there because we see its consequences in the sewer. The losers retreat from Neibolt. Extended scene. After Pennywise wounds Eddie and the losers barely escape the house, there was originally a longer follow-up of them escaping from there. The extended sequence simply shows the kids piling onto their bikes and speeding away from 29 Neibolt Street as fast as humanly possible. It doesn't add much beyond telling us about their fear and panic. Now, the film already conveyed this well enough, so it's no surprise that this was cut down to the essentials. Still, imagine an extra 30 seconds of frantic bike pedaling. It was bound to add some tension in the hearts and minds of us poor losers. Eddie and his crush, Greta. In the theatrical cut, Eddie's awkward encounter with the mean girl Greta, who signs his cast loser, is pretty brief. A longer version of that scene exists where Eddie lingers, or rather longs, to chat with her a bit more. We don't have the exact dialogue, but presumably it's more of Eddie being adorably nervous around Greta. Given Eddie's arc of gaining courage, an extra dose of him fumbling through small talk could have been cute, but again, it wasn't vital to the story. The Losers Club Orgy, the book's most controversial scene, which was left out for good reason. Stephen King's novel is a disturbing piece of work, and not just because of the eponymous villain. One infamous sequence from Stephen King's novel It was never even considered for filming, and thank goodness for that. If you've read the 1986 book, you know what we're referring to, the underage sex scene in the sewers. In the novel, after the losers defeat It as kids, they become lost in Derry's underground tunnels. At this point, Beverly Marsh decides the way to bond the group back together is by doing each of the boys one by one. Yup, King actually wrote that, and no, the filmmakers were never going to try putting it on screen in 2017. Co-writer Gary Dauberman addressed this in an interview with Digital Spy, where he was asked why the Losers Club orgy was omitted. It's such a shame because it's an important scene, but it doesn't define the book in any way, and it shouldn't define it, Dauberman said, and with that, he made it clear that the spirit of that bizarre bonding moment was important and was achieved in the film, yes, but slightly different. The intent of the underage orgy in the book was to serve as a transition for those kids from childhood to adulthood. The movie does this through the shared blood oath and their emotional reconciliation, rather than doing anything R-rated and questionable on more levels than one could count. Dauberman also stated that they knew what King was going for with that scene, and they tried to accomplish what the intent was in a different way. In other words, the losers reaffirm their friendship and promise to return if It isn't truly dead, all without any underage hanky-panky. Stephen King himself has said that he understands explains why modern adaptations leave this bit out. Times have changed, and depicting a preteen sexual encounter on film isn't just taboo, it's basically unthinkable and maybe even criminal, not to mention totally irrelevant to the plot of a horror movie. King admitted he wasn't really focused on the sexual aspect when he wrote it in the 80s, and we agree with him. Times were different back then, and let's be honest, if you take that age, some 40 years ago, it was a metaphor for lost innocence and a literal coming of age, albeit a very, very ill-advised one, but nothing more than that truly. He's even expressed a bit of amusement that people harp on that scene more than, say, all the child murders in It. And I mean, he's really got a point. Remember the scene from Dark Knight where Joker talks to Harvey Dent? And correct me if I'm wrong, but he says something along the lines of, a bus full of soldiers gets bombed and people don't bat an eye, but if the bus were filled with school children, everyone loses their shit. That's the same thing here. Child murders are more normalized than child sex. Regardless, Muschietti and the team made the wise call to leave Beverly's controversial chapter on the page. You won't find it in any deleted scenes reel. It was never shot at all. Some things are best left to the imagination, or better yet, left behind in 1986 where they belong. Now, let's move on to It Chapter 2. The Black Spot, a scrapped opening flashback. It wasn't just underage mating season that was a problem in Derry. The place was plagued with other evils as well, one of the most significant being racism. One of the darkest and most significant pieces of Derry's history almost opened Chapter 2, and it's called The Black Spot Fire. In Stephen King's novel, The Black Spot was a nightclub that was burned down by a racist cult in the 1960s. This was also the event that killed Mike Hanlon's parents, among many others. Early in production, the Muschiettis considered dramatizing this tragedy as the film's opening scene. Producer Barbara Muschietti even teased that the Black Spot Massacre would make a great opening, perhaps to mirror how Chapter 1 opened with Georgie's death and Chapter 2 with Adrian Mellon's murder. There is evidence they prepared to film it. One onlooker in Port Hope, the shooting location for Derry, claimed to have seen sets or footage for both the Adrian Mellon hate crime and the Black Spot fire. However, by release, the Black Spot flashback was nowhere to be seen. It's unclear if the scene was ever fully shot or ultimately just left in the script stage, but it was planned to feature as an opener at one point. In the end, Chapter 2 chose to begin with Adrian Mellon's fate from its Chapter 2 in the novel, and Mike's knowledge of the Black Spot was relegated to a brief mention. Mike's Haunted Childhood Home Flashback. Mike Hanlon's role as Derry's historian was originally given more emotional weight with a personal flashback. Cinematographer Checo Varise revealed that they filmed a very, very tender and very sweet scene in which young Mike returns to the charred ruins of his family home, the same house that burned down and killed his parents decades ago. In the finished film, we only get a hint of this traumatic memory, a quick shot of toddler Mike watching a fire through a door crack. According to Varise, that brief shot was meant to expand into a full encounter at the burnt house, possibly with Pennywise appearing to Mike there. Mike is a very lovable character throughout, so I think the audience would have a wonderful time seeing what he remembers of that moment. Varise said, "It's easy to imagine a tense scene of Mike wandering the ashy remains of his childhood home, only to face Pennywise amidst the flames." The moment was described as super beautiful by the cinematographer, not words one usually associates with a killer clown, but perhaps indicating a visually striking or poignant approach. Ultimately, runtime won out. At 169 minutes, It Chapter 2 had to be merciless, and Mike's flashback was one of the casualties of pacing. Muschietti has said that some great moments were cut for time, and this haunting visit to the past sounds like one of them. Interestingly, one deleted scene involving Mike did survive in a different form. The famous Black Spot was slyly referenced during Mike's drug-induced ritual of Chud exposition. In the film, Mike shows Bill an artifact and narrates past events, but a more elaborate flashback to the Black Spot, as discussed above, was likely considered to bolster Mike's research scene.
Your father passed away. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Beverly and Mrs. Kersh. One of It Chapter 2's most unsettling set pieces is Beverly Marsh's visit to her old apartment, now occupied by the seemingly sweet Mrs. Kersh. In the theatrical cut, the tension mounts until Mrs. Kersh's grotesque true form, an eerie, giant witch-like creature, chases Beverly. But originally, this sequence was even longer, including a moment where Bev witnesses a vision of her father inside the Kersh house. Muschietti drew directly from King's novel here. In the book, as Beverly flees Mrs. Kersh, she briefly sees it take the shape of her abusive father, Alvin Marsh. The film shot this beat as well, reinforcing that Bev is still psychologically trapped in the same cycle of abuse and fear she knew as a child. According to reports, after Beverly escapes the house in the extended cut, she was to find a red balloon waiting for her outside on the street, a final taunt from Pennywise, reminding her that the nightmare wasn't over. A behind-the-scenes photo even showed Jessica Chastain's Bev standing in the street holding that telltale balloon, although this moment doesn't appear appear in the movie. All of this adds extra context. Bev is not only being terrorized by Pennywise in a grandma disguise, she's also reliving the trauma of her father's violence, which Pennywise happily exploits. It's not difficult to see why this part was cut. The Mrs. Kersh scene in the final film already has a relentless fever dream quality, and pausing for a hallucinatory cameo by Bev's dad might have disrupted the momentum. Still, fans would have appreciated this nod to Beverly's past, underscoring how it preys on her deepest fears. The extended scene would hammer that home even 27 years later. Pennywise's 1600s origin story. What is Pennywise really? Chapter 2 gives us a few hints in the sense that it explains about the alien deadlights and a crash-landed meteor in ancient times, but one cut scene would have shown far more and truly defined its origins. Andy Muschietti revealed that he filmed an origin sequence set in the 1600s that acts as a sort of backstory for Pennywise/It. Bill Skarsgård described this flashback as very disturbing, and it showed a human-looking Pennywise before he became the clown in an earlier version of Derry. The implication is that the evil entity was dormant for millennia, and when it awoke centuries ago, it perhaps took on the form of a man, Mr. Robert Bob Gray, who would become Pennywise. In Muschietti's words, the scene was cut because it was a little confusing, and giving too much away can diminish the mystique. People sometimes want to know a little more, but if you give them too much, then they're disappointed. It's like a magic trick, he explained. Indeed, King's novel keeps Pennywise's true nature quite mysterious, to say the least. Even though we learn about the Macroverse, the turtle, and its alien origin, King never fully demystifies the clown. Muschietti seems to have taken that lesson to heart. He filmed an origin where a colonial-era Pennywise possibly lured children, but ultimately decided that opening that curtain might spoil the magic. Still, the idea of seeing Pennywise out of clown makeup as a human in the 17th century, that's kind of fascinating. The scene likely would have expanded on Pennywise referring to himself as the Eater of Worlds, and could have tied into the legend of Bob Gray, a name so simple it sounds like your accountant or your next-door neighbor who sits on park benches eating birds and watching children play. The world of It, which is basically a behind-the-scenes book, includes a concept art of a young Pennywise in old-timey garb. Muschietti admits he loved the scene and is considering how to rework it into the supercut.
Kiss me, fat boy.
Ben's alternate childhood encounter at the quarry. Ben Hanscom's adult token quest in Chapter 2 sends him back to Derry High School, which triggers a flashback of young Ben facing Pennywise in the school hallway. But originally, Ben's memory was going to play out at a different location, the Baron's Quarry, where the losers used to swim. Early reports indicated that an alternate Ben flashback set at the quarry in winter was scripted and even possibly filmed. It's unclear exactly what transpired in this version, but fans speculate it might have involved the losers' famous dam building scene in the novel, where the kids bond in the Barrens, or even a nod to the smoke hole ritual in the book. Richie and Mike inhale smoke from a fire to gain a vision of its origin. What we do know, the theatrical cut's Ben flashback in the school was a late change. The It companion book shows behind-the-scenes photos of a burning Easter egg hunt in the school, which suggests that even the school set flashback had alternate beats, possibly referencing the Ironworks explosion, another Derry tragedy from 1908. In fact, according to Reddit, a winter fire scene for Ben at the frozen quarry was definitely planned. Perhaps young Ben was to confront Pennywise near an ice-covered lake, echoing the novel's scene where the losers escape Henry Bowers at a winter carnival. This was likely adjusted due to time and budget, moving the action to an indoor school set piece. Another change involves Ben's childhood love for Beverly. In Chapter 2, Ben's big secret, the postcard poem he wrote Beverly, is paid off in the clubhouse flashback and the finale. But some fans wondered if there was an alternate adult Ben and Beverly interaction that got shortened. For example, one cut bit from the Chinese restaurant scene had Ben drunkenly reciting the postcard poem aloud, as seen in the behind-the-scenes reels, which didn't appear in the final cut. While not a whole scene, it shows how Ben and Beverly's romance arc had small extensions that were pared down for flow. In the end, the flashbacks we got still serve Ben's story. He was a lonely kid whose happiest memories and deepest fears revolved around Beverly's acceptance of him. The alternate quarry scene might have been another scare for young Ben under winter skies, a fun homage to King's lore, but its absence doesn't hurt the narrative. Richie's dirty little secret. Richie Tozer's arc in Chapter 2 was praised for its emotional depth because it revealed Richie's secret love for Eddie and also spoke about the fact that Richie is gay, which Pennywise basically weaponizes against him. Interestingly, there was an alternate take of Pennywise taunting Richie about his secret that didn't fully play out in the movie. In the final battle, Pennywise says, "I know your secret, your dirty little secret," to a devastated Richie. But an earlier scripted version, which is reflected in the soundtrack titled Dirty Little Secret, talks about a longer confrontation. Bill Skarsgård recorded extra dialogue during VFX facial capture for Pennywise, possibly going further into Richie's feelings. It's unclear if a whole scene was cut or just shortened, but it seems Pennywise originally pushed the taunt further. Ultimately, the filmmakers may have decided that a few pointed words and Richie's anguished reaction said enough. Other axed jump scares. Another rumored scare that never surfaced had Pennywise taking the shapes of two of his child victims, Little Dean and Victoria, aka Vicky, the girl under the bleachers, to terrorize the adult losers. In fact, there's a production still which clearly shows that it masquerades as Dean and Vicky at some point. Outside of the main losers, Henry Bowers also had a few moments that got scrapped. Teach Grant, who played adult Henry, mentioned he shot more with Owen Teague, who cameoed as young Patrick Hockstetter in Henry's vision. He says that it didn't make it to the film, and a brief extension after Henry's attack on Mike, the one where Henry in a wounded state encounters dead Hockstetter and urges him on, was scripted but cut for pacing. Henry's subplot was already minimal, so trimming it kept the focus on the losers. Finally, one small deleted beat had director Andy Muschietti himself in a cameo as a Derry cop. In a scene likely intended to follow Adrian Mellon's death, Mike was to speak with a police officer on the bridge, played by Muschietti, during the investigation. A photograph in the World of It book shows Andy in a state trooper uniform on that very overpass, confirming the scene's existence. The scene was cut, but Muschietti at least snuck in a different cameo. In the pharmacy scene, you can hear the pharmacist on the intercom paging Mushi. Additionally, he had another cameo in Chapter 2 as a man eating a hot dog. Maturin the turtle makes and loses an appearance. One of the wildest cuts from It Chapter 2 has the most Stephen King element of all, Maturin, the ancient cosmic turtle. King's novel introduces Maturin as a godlike turtle who created the universe and serves as a counterforce to It. While the first It film only gives us tiny turtle Easter eggs, like the Lego turtle in Georgie's room, Muschietti actually went so far as to film a turtle cameo scene for Chapter 2. He described the sequence in detail. During Bill Denbrough's token quest, when Bill is in that flooded basement trying to rescue young Georgie and ultimately battling a manifestation of his younger self, he becomes lost underwater. Suddenly, Pennywise's eyes appear in the dark, only for them to belong to a giant turtle swimming past Bill. Bill is mesmerized, thinking, "What is this thing?" before seeing his fellow loser club kids swimming after the turtle. He then follows them toward a light and surfaces back into the cavern. In other words, the turtle would have briefly guided Bill out of his mental maze, a strange but hopeful symbol amidst the fear. Muschietti loved the scene, but cut it for pacing and tonal consistency. By that point in the film, the final battle was gearing up, and a left-field ethereal interlude with a benevolent turtle might have felt like a detour into high fantasy. It was very emotional, but it wasn't at the right moment, where things had to move faster, Muschietti explains. He was also very wary of tilting the movie too far into the cosmic. As he noted elsewhere, he didn't want general audiences scratching their heads at a sudden multiverse-style spirit guide showing up on screen. That said, many King fans were sad to lose this nod to the wider macroverse. The idea that the losers had a guardian as well as a monster gives the story an added mythic layer. Had it stayed, people might have been split between Maturin's cheerleaders and those confused by what or who the hell the turtle was. The filmmakers chose to keep the focus on the losers versus Pennywise, with no extra Deus Ex Reptilia involved. Having said that, Muschietti has teased that this scene could resurface in the eventual supercut. In a movie about a shape-shifting clown spider from beyond space, surely there's room for one ancient turtle cameo, right? At least we have one turtle Easter egg intact in Chapter 2. Look closely during the classroom scene of young Ben, and there's a model turtle on Miss Kersh's desk. Maturin was watching over them all along. The cameo that almost was. The legendary Guillermo del Toro as Janitor. Cameos in It Chapter 2 were a fun surprise, from Stephen King playing a curmudgeonly shopkeep to director Peter Bogdanovich as himself. But one cameo that didn't pan out was horror maestro Guillermo del Toro, who was this close to appearing as a janitor in Ben's flashback. Andy Muschietti revealed that he wanted his friend del Toro to play the school janitor whom young Ben runs into while fleeing Pennywise. The idea was evidently more than a passing wish. They had this part written and an invitation sent, but scheduling didn't work out. We were this close. He was going to play the janitor that Ben runs into. That scene, of course, would have been like 5 minutes longer if Guillermo was in it, Muschietti joked. One can only imagine the Academy Award-winning director of Pan's Labyrinth mopping the halls of Derry High, possibly with a witty line or two. Ultimately, the janitor role in the film is just an unnamed extra, and blink and you'll miss him. Del Toro's absence is a tiny footnote, but it speaks to Muschietti's enthusiasm for filling it with Easter eggs. Muschietti loves cameos. He considers himself very ambitious when it comes to cameos, cameos and thought having Del Toro pop up would delight horror fans. There were a few other unused cameos or references as well. In early rumors, fans hoped for a Dick Halloran cameo, the Shining character who, in King's book, saved Mike's father from the Black Spot fire. If the Black Spot scene had been filmed, Halloran might have appeared, but since it wasn't, the crossover went unrealized. On the bright side, Chapter 2 did squeeze in a cameo by Brandon Crane, the actor who played young Ben in the 1990 It miniseries, as a boardroom guest during adult Ben's introduction. And of course, King's own cameo in the antique shop gave us a fun meta joke about Bill's endings. Still, a Guillermo del Toro janitor would have been the ultimate spot the famous horror icon moment. We're almost at the end of this video, but we're going to wrap things up by talking about Muschietti's ambitious 7-hour-long supercut and a few new scenes. Andy Muschietti hasn't been shy about his desire to release a massive It supercut, combining chapters 1 and 2 into one epic, potentially 7+ hour long saga. This would be an assembly cut of the two movies, but Muschietti also wants to reincorporate all the deleted scenes from both films and even shoot new material to weave the story together more cohesively. We call it the supercut, Muschietti said. It will contain all the scenes that were deleted from both movies for pacing reasons and hopefully new material, stuff that I haven't shot yet. He's floated ideas such as adding interludes that flesh out Derry's cursed history, more of It's cosmic origins, and creative transitions between time periods. One whimsical example Muschietti gave was this. He said, and I quote, "Imagine having the two movies as a whole and recalibrating things. You know what would be great? Seeing Richie flying in the macroverse, or whatever." That tongue-in-cheek suggestion shows Muschietti is thinking outside the box, perhaps giving Richie, or the losers collectively, a surreal vision of King's wider cosmology. You know, the macroverse, the turtle, the whole shebang. This would better bridge the child and adult storylines as well. He's mentioned two new scenes in particular he'd like to add for the supercut, though he hasn't specified what they are. But all of this is at least 4 years old news, and no new developments have been made since then. For now, It, Chapter 1 and 2's deleted scenes are just that, deleted scenes. But the fact that Muschietti is determined to make it happen means we might not have seen the last of Derry's nightmares. Whether it's on a Blu-ray special edition or HBO Max, just Max these days, whether we see it on a Blu-ray special edition or HBO Max, I'll be dead and cold before I call it just Max, the prospect of a nearly 7-hour It supercut with all those deleted scenes re-edited in their bloody glory has me on my toes salivating like Pennywise at a children's playdate. Unfortunately, that's all for now, guys, but we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.